The thinker, the feeler, and the doer all have different perspectives. They see the world differently, and it does some good to get into their shoes. We were having a lot of fun one time in New Zealand. We were doing training there, and we had, I think, 30 people in training, and we'd made 30 notebooks. And Ray was in charge of this section of the training and getting the notebooks out and having that take place. And he's always emphasizing you get in the other person's shoes. You sit where they sit before you talk to them, and it's very important to understand people and what they're like. Well, Ray also panics a lot when things don't go well and everything isn't perfect. And so we've got 30 notebooks and we have 30 students, and he says, everyone come forward and get a notebook, and they all get a notebook, and we're missing one notebook. Well, Ray hits the panic button, we're missing this one notebook. And when he hits the panic button, he starts repeating. And he says, I don't know what happened to me notebooks. I just had my notebooks. I just counted the notebooks. He says, right up in my office counting the notebooks. I put the notebooks together myself. He said, I counted them that many times. I had 30 notebooks. He said, how could I be missing a notebook? I just couldn't be missing a notebook. I don't know what happened to me notebook. And he's going on and on about this notebook. And here we got a whole group here to study. We got one poor person left out with no notebook. He says, you know what I'm wondering? He said, would there be any Scottish people here? Do we have any Scottish people in the audience? Well, there's one Scottish woman who comes every year to the conference with the express purpose of correcting me. That's why she comes. She's an elderly lady, and she's thumbing the whole time through her Bible, writing down things, and then at the break I get my corrections. And she's got a big bouffant, and she's very, very serious. You don't see her laugh. You don't see anything take place. And Ray's wanting to know, well, do you have any Scottish people in the room? Is there any Scotsmen here? And I'm sitting on the front row going, And he says, well, I'll tell you this. I know the Scotsman. I grew up around it. And here's what goes on in a Scotsman's mind. Well, the notebooks are free. I'll just take an extra one. I'll take one home to me neighbor. I'll take one home to me husband. I'll let the kids have one of them. They're free. Why not take them? They're just free. I'll give me an extra one. He said, would there be any Scottish people here? Do we have any here? And I'm on the front row going, no. And then this lady raises her hand, and she says, aye. It sounds like beam me up, Scotty. I'm from Scotland. And Ray says, would you have me notebook? She turned bright red and reached underneath her desk and pulled out the extra notebook. And he said, well, I knew it would be with a Scotsman. I just knew it. And she says, well, they were free, and I just thought, well, I could take one home to my husband. He said, bring it up, love. Bring your notebook up here and give it to the poor man. Well, you get into somebody else's shoes and you get to know them. You start to understand them. And that's what we're saying. When it comes to these false judgments, many of them are rooted in the fact that I don't know you. And we have God and His creativity and the expression of His life through mind, will, and emotions in these different people. And we're looking at the characteristics that they have. A thinker absolutely loves the truth, don't they? Borrow something from them and break it. They don't care that you broke it, but if you lie about breaking it, they're right over the edge. The other thing about a thinker is this, is that their mind is a whole bunch of dominoes. And so when you say something to them, the dominoes begin to fall, and then the reaction you get comes all the way down here. So I use this example. I have my lunch appointment canceled. I go home. I go flying back to the house impulsively, and I say to Betty, listen, grab your coat. My lunch appointment canceled. We're going to go out and eat. And Betty does this. Well, do you want to eat or not? Are you hungry or not? Grab your coat. Did you hear I got a cancellation? We can go out and have lunch together. Well, love, get your coat. Let's go. We've got... And then I hear this. No. Well, what's that all about? Well, here's what happened. The dominoes started falling. Betty has the whole day planned. Everything's on the list. Every minute's accounted for. And now I've come in as a whirlwind, as a big interruption, And if I take her away, she was just getting ready to sweep in the corners, and that means that she won't get the dishes done on time, and that means the snacks won't be there for the kids, and that means the laundry's going to get done late, and that means that she's going to go into bed a whole lot later, and I've just wrecked her day by asking her to go out and have lunch with me. And the response I got came out of all of these dominoes falling. You know, it's fun being married to a thinker because you ask them this question. You want to go out and eat? I don't know. I don't know. Well, let's go out and eat. Well, okay. What do you want to eat? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Well, you want Chinese? You want American? You want Italian? What do you? I don't know. I don't know. All right, well, we'll go over and we'll get Italian food. How's that? You want to go to a movie afterwards? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Two thinkers are married together. They just stand in the room all day in the hall staring at each other going, I don't know. I don't know. They don't get anywhere. Two feelers are married together. You'll never find them at home and the phone's always busy. You got two doers married together. Every year buy them new dishes because they love a good fight. Have you ever been with two doers? I mean, the way they'll communicate and the way things are flying around in the house, you can't imagine that people would actually talk that way. Now, Ray and his wife, they're really doers. An amazing thing that I learned by watching them is that when they're having a problem, their concept is that you don't go to bed angry. You don't go to bed until it's resolved. Well, some nights I don't think they get to bed. Because when they're upset, they let the whole thing go. It doesn't matter who's there, and they talk about it, and they get the whole thing out, and they work through the whole thing. And one time his brother said to him, because Kath and Ray were working through all this stuff, and then in the middle of all this, we went to church. And Ray preached a sermon that sounded like it dropped out of heaven. And it was just a fantastic sermon. And they got in the car and started at it again as soon as they got in the car. And finally, later on that night, they got it resolved. And when they get it resolved, everyone in the house knows that too. And his brother said to him, how can you do that? How can you guys argue like that? And then you go preach a sermon like that? How do you do that? And Ray said something that's very interesting that helped me. He said, they're not related. They're not related. You've related them, but they're not related. He said, I'm in love with Kath, and Kath is in love with me. Kath isn't going anywhere, and I'm not going anywhere. And he said, we know that. And how we work through an issue is that both of us get vocal and we talk about it. That's how we do it in our growth in our own relationship. You don't have to do it that way. I do it. And he said, I'm working on that relationship with Kath. Kath is working on it with me. And at the same time, we're both working in our relationship in Christ. But he said, because this one over here isn't right at this moment, and we got things to work through, doesn't mean that this one over here isn't right. My one with God was right all the time. That's just how we work through things. You know, I've taken that, and it's so important because there's very few couples that ever work through anything. They just don't work through it. They just don't talk. They withdraw. They keep it all hidden. They keep it all buried. They don't find out what the person really meant, what they were talking about, what their actions really were. They just don't work through it. And to me, I could see then in him that he actually worked through all the issues. I had a great time. I went there one time, and Ray was going up to the coast to pick me up, which was about 8 hours. And halfway there, his car broke down. And so he called Kath to come and get him. And while he's standing there waiting, a tow truck just happens to come by and say, do you want me to take you? So the tow truck took the car and went on, and Ray came on up the coast. And he never did call Kath. So she spent the whole day going up and down the coast trying to find him. And she was steamed when she finally found us. Well, I had the best week of my life. Because what I'd do is when things finally calmed down and we were riding together, I was sitting in the back seat and I'd say, tell me again, Ray, why you would just call Kath to come and get you and then take a tow truck and go somewhere. I said, would you explain that to me? I can't imagine somebody doing that. And Kath would look at him and go, yeah, why did you do that? Why would you do that? And then she was right into him again, and he'd have the rearview mirror just staring at me. And I'd let the thing calm down and wait a while and then say, Ray, I still don't quite get it. I don't see how a guy could do that and just leave his wife for the day on the road looking for someone. He finally put me on the plane when I left. He said, I'm glad to see you go. You're a marriage wrecker, brother. You're nothing but a marriage wrecker. Well, thinkers have their lists. They're extremely loyal, aren't they? They have 1 to 3 close friends their whole life, and those are people that really know them and understand them. Now, a thinker has a pressure cooker inside of them, and as events take place, the dial is turned up, and one day they explode, and the explosion's huge. And you wonder how the explosion could be that big over this last event. But it isn't the last event that causes, or it isn't the last event that is the explosion. It's the culmination of things that have taken place over a 6-month period. When a thinker blows, they're blowing up over a whole lot of things and a lot of frustrations. Feelers have minor explosions, and they'll drive to the end of the driveway and say, oh, it isn't worth being angry over, and they're done. They still have explosions, they're just minor ones. The doer has an explosion that takes place and encompasses everyone around them when they explode, and then they're done with it. And we could say this about doers, that they're ulcer givers, and the feelers and the thinkers are more of the ulcer getters. These people all perceive money in a different way, and we mentioned that a little bit before, but money for a thinker is security. Money for a feeler is just freedom. And money for a doer is a tool to get some other thing going. And so they'll use money, of course, to fulfill their desire for risk-taking and excitement in life. If you see these 3 people going to the market, here's how they go to the grocery store. The thinker drives to the grocery store, they have their list, and they have all their coupons in line. And they know exactly what they're going to buy, and they have their calculator. They pull into the parking lot, and when they pull into the parking lot, they move back and forth until they're exactly between the yellow lines. Then before they get out of the car, they've got to reach above the visor or in the glove box and get out that little pad where you write down your mileage. It's the same mileage there, but we've got to write that down again. So they write down their mileage, and then they put that in their pocket, and they head out the door. As they're out the car door into the market. As they're going into the market, here comes the feeler flying into the parking lot. Windows down, stereo blowing, the hamburger wrappers from the last 6 months whipping around in the car. There's a feeling of movement. There's activity. Things are happening. Things are taking place. This is exciting. They come in and they hammer in at an angle. They hit the curb. Their door's broke. They crawl out the window and they run past the thinker. Well, that's why the thinker keeps the pad in his pocket, just for those kind of emergencies. And so he gets it out and writes, please mind where you park. Park between the yellow lines. Don't you know that other people have to park here too? And he rips that off and he puts it underneath the windshield wiper. Now, it doesn't do any good, because the feeler gets back in his car later, he's driving along, and he sees the piece of paper on the wiper. He hits his wiper to try to get the piece of paper, and he's trying to get it as he's going out there, and the thing flies off, and that's it. Do you know Tim Lester? Some of you know him. And he's just a compulsive feeler. And we had to take a trip. It was about an 8-hour trip, and it rained the first half hour. And Tim's talking and talking and talking and driving, and the wipers are going, and then finally it stops raining. And I thought to myself, I'm just going to time how long it takes Tim to turn off the wipers. Do you know, after 3 hours, I was ready to go out of my mind, and the wipers had just burnt in by then, and it was just... And Tim just driving along, talking and going and going and going with those wipers burning away. A feeler does not have attention to detail in those kind of things. Now, then the feeler goes shooting off. He's in the grocery store. And the thinker's still trying to get there himself, and he's traumatized by the way this feeler's parked and the way the car looks, and he'd like to pick it up before he goes in there. And before he can get in the market then, here comes the doer. And the doer drives his big Cadillac right up into the handicap parking place and gets out and slams the door and walks off and leaves the keys in it. Well, at that, the thinker can't handle it anymore. Hey, that parking place is for handicap. That's handicapped. You shouldn't be parking there. And the doer walks past him and says, let them crawl in. It'll be like a job. They don't do anything anyway. And he just moves past them. Now, the thinker's job in there is to check every price and to get it done, and the shopping takes a long time. The feeler's already lost their list, and so they can't remember what they're supposed to get. They're attracted to bright colors, so they go to the end displays. Well, how about some sodas, and how about some chips, and we'll get some candies, and they get all those kind of things. And then, of course, the doer steps in, finds a clerk, and hands them the list and says, get the stuff and bring it on up here. You see all of these people acting in a different way. And they all have a different kind of humor, don't they? I mean, I love the humor of a thinker that's just a little bit cutting and got a bite to it, and you're not really quite sure what they said to you when they walk away. And I was using the example, and Doug knows my son Zeb. He's got that kind of temperament. And one day we're watching television, and the other two kids just look like clones of Betty. You can look at their baby pictures and Betty's, and you can't tell them apart. Zeb's the only one that looks a little bit like me. And we're watching television, and I looked at his profile, and I said, do you know, Zeb, you're the only kid that looks a little bit like me. And he just kept watching TV and said, well, I guess I better join the gym and lose some weight. And he just kept watching television. That's all he said. So you have that kind of different kind of humor that's a little bit biting that comes out of these people. Would you disciple these three people differently? And recognizing that, would you do something different with them? Because I know that when I'm talking to the thinker, they want to know the details of exactly how this is going to work out. Not just the words abiding life, but what is abiding life? How's that going to work out when I go home tonight? How does that work out with my husband? How does that work out with my kids? What does that mean? And it's our responsibility to take the time out and say, this is what it means. You know, with the feeler, you got to pull them out of their guilt and living out of emotions and get them moving into the fact and moving into faith. And one of the things that'll happen to them in discipleship is they'll start tubing it and they'll be discouraged, and you've got to encourage them. And then, of course, you go with the doer, and when you're discipling them, they're always positioning themselves above you. They always want a position above you. They always want their thumb on you, and you can't let that happen. And so I've shared with some of you, a fellow who came in who was a doer. He was a millionaire. His wife had made the appointment. I thought he'd made it. And the first thing he says to me, he stands in front of my desk, comes stomping in the door, and said, who in the world do you think you are to call me in here? And I said, I didn't know I called you in. And he said, yeah, you made an appointment. I said, no. I said, everybody makes their own. Your wife must have made it. And he said, well, don't you ever call me in. I got up from my desk, I grabbed him by the arm, and I took him to the door and threw him out and slammed the door and went back and sat down. The next thing I know, he's right back in. And he said, what are you doing throwing me out? And I got up again, and I grabbed him by the arm, and I pushed him to the door, and I said, get out. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know what you think I do all day long, but my job is not to disciple someone who's an ass. You're an ass. And I slammed the door. See, I knew that a doer loves conflict and that he wouldn't leave then. You know what? He opens the door back up and says, hey, I had an appointment with you. I expect you to keep it. I couldn't believe it. And then he says to me, I've never had anybody talk to me that way. And I said, I'll tell you something, mate. That's true. No one's talked to you that way, but everyone talks about you that way. I'm the only friend you've got. Because you got money, people show partiality to you, and they don't tell you what they really think about you. You've wrecked your family, and you've wrecked your kids. And I went for the throat. And do you know that man respected that, and he sat there and he listened to it, and he made another appointment and another appointment and another appointment to come in to work through that. But the whole time he was trying to position above me, trying to get his thumb on top of me. Now, you wouldn't do that to a thinker. You'd never see him again. And you wouldn't do that to a feeler. And I'm not saying that I enjoy doing that kind of thing. But my goal is to see someone move into Christ, and I recognize those differences, and you want to work with someone on that level. And a doer will disciple others by getting behind them and kicking and saying, let's go, let's go. And a thinker will actually walk beside you and try to give you the facts to get you to go. And a feeler will stand in front of you and say, come on, come on, come on. There's advantages and disadvantages to all of these, and the advantage and disadvantage is a very simple one, is Christ's life ruling over my uniqueness, or am I ruling over it? That's the advantage. If you can see that, you can come to a place of really loving yourself. Now, God doesn't show partiality in personalities. And so I look at it like this. There's mind, will, and emotion, and God gives everybody 10 units. And some people get 8 units of mind and 1 of will and 1 of emotion. Now, that person is going to do very well in school, aren't they? Because it's the thinkers that have developed school, and it all centers around thinkers and the ability to be able to memorize and regurgitate information. So the thinker's going to do better there in school. Then you have people who have 8 units of willpower. Those are the doers, and they'll be out there promoting and getting things started. And then you can have somebody who has 8 units of emotion, and that's the people person. That can often be the person that runs for politics and those kind of things. But my point is this: God gives everybody 10 units. He doesn't show partiality. Now we go back to our original question now. We're told to crucify self, which is a bad saying because you can't crucify yourself. I can give you 3 nails and a hammer, and in the end you just end up looking stupid. You can't crucify yourself. But we're said that self needs to be crucified. Then we need to deny self and at the same time love self. And here's what that looks like then. What we're talking about are the things that drive my uniqueness. So here's my unique self, my talent and ability and intellect that's based in the soul, in the mind, will, and emotions. We're born with the old man, the old nature, the old life ruling over our personality, and what it does is express flesh or fallen humanity. And as we do that, we live in hell, and we're also going to go to hell. I believe that Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy magazine, was created by God to start churches. But because of his past and because of his rejection and because of the old nature that's ruling over him, instead of doing that, he starts a porno empire. The solution to this is that I have to be crucified with Christ and get a new life. Now, once I get that new life, even though Christ is my life, the residue of that old life is still in me. And so we can look at it like this. Someone close to you dies, and even though they're dead and gone, their baggage is still in the house. If you go look at their baggage, it'll stir you all up. Even though you've been crucified with Christ, the Adam life has been actually removed out of you. The baggage of the Adam life is still here. Don't you still remember your hurts? Don't you still remember how to cope without Christ? Don't you still remember some of the idols that you had? Some of the feelings that you had? And if we allow those things now to continue to rule over my uniqueness, I'll still express flesh, human flesh, and the deeds of the flesh. Now, be very careful then when you look at the expression of someone's flesh and you determine that they're not a Christian, or some people would say that they've fallen completely away from God. Because these two people can have the exact same expression of flesh. An unbeliever and a carnal Christian can have the same expression of flesh. But the difference is one is going to hell and living in hell. The other is going to heaven but living in hell. They're still going to go to heaven. And I think one of the people you see that's evident in is Jimmy Baker. Jimmy Baker wasn't doing anything any different than Hugh Hefner. But Jimmy Baker has a lot bigger conflict going on inside of him than Hugh Hefner ever had. Because even though he was walking in the flesh and expressing flesh and allowing the residue of the old life to rule over him, he still had Christ in him. He's an interesting guy to listen to now, to hear now, just in his brokenness and what he shares and what he says about Jesus and how he got to where he was going. This is crucified, and now this baggage needs to be denied and let Christ's life come and rule over it. So every morning we get up and we just simply say this: I know that everything that's coming to me today, Father, a human cannot handle. In my humanness, I've tried to handle it. In my humanity, I've tried to, and I've never been able to handle it. That to live victorious on this life takes divinity, and that takes the divine. So today I deny myself, my humanity, and everything that is, and you come and you live it through me, and I move over here where Christ is in charge of my uniqueness, and I have an expression of the Spirit that's unique. And not only am I going to heaven, I'm now living in heaven. And do you know, I can honestly say that I love this. I just love it. When nothing's ruling over me but him, and and the expression of his life is coming through me. You can look at it in a couple other ways, and we'll finish up on personalities and our uniqueness. Thinkers are detail-oriented. They're at the top of the pyramid. That's the focus on detail. The doers are midway between this because generally they have a plan, but they want to use people to get the plan done. And feelers are down here, and they're very broad in their relationship with others. And again, relationship being identity. Now, when couples marry, and often you have different personalities because the greatest grounds for oneness isn't compatibility, but incompatibility. So if we take a circle, and these circles are identical in both ways in the way they're cut, do they come together very well? Well, they don't. But if we take a circle then and we cut it in opposites, it'll come together perfectly. And so often it's in our incompatibility that we're so compatible. And as you look at this and you have the man here and the woman here, the low point for the woman, if you flip this thing around, is the high point for the man. The amazing thing is that these people who are opposites will always raise great kids. But they'll be fighting all the time because they'll see things differently. And you'll have one parent who's compassion-driven and the other parent who's performance-driven. Do you know a kid needs both of those? But if you get two performance-driven parents, you'll have a kid that's a wreck. If you have two compassion-driven parents, you'll have a kid that's a wreck. I had two totally compassion-driven parents in the office, and these people were, like I said, pushing Jell-O on a hot day with a wet noodle. They had so much compassion, it was ridiculous. And their son, I'll tell you how out of control he was. Do you know how they got him to go to bed at night? They put Oreo cookies on every other step up to his bedroom. He was that much in control. They wouldn't have any kind of performance with him. And so they would get him to eat the cookies and then get in and lock the door from the outside, let him scream and have a temper tantrum before he went to bed. Well, we see the world differently. And incompatibility isn't bad. That's my point. But what a doer will do is they'll yell down at their thinker wife and say, "You're too passive. Would you move quicker?" And so she moves up 3 floors and makes a 300% improvement. That's a big improvement. But if you're on the top of the Empire State Building looking down at someone that moves up 3 floors, do they look like they've moved very far to you? And he yells down and says, "Well, I thought you were going to do something." And she says, "Well, rain on you. I'll go back here. Why don't you come down?" So he comes down 3 floors, makes a 300% improvement. She looks up and says, "I thought you were going to do something different." And he says, "Well, blow that. I'll just go back up here." And we're actually discouraging a person from making any kind of improvement. Now, one last thing about it is that we have different energy levels. It's important to see that. A thinker's energy level starts high and dribbles off to nothing at night. The little pumpkin rolls up and pulls them away, and that's the end of it. And they're done. People drain their energy, and all day long people have drained it, and they're ready now to go to bed and go and read themselves to sleep. And they have to read themselves to sleep because they must not think, can't think. If I think I won't sleep, must not think. So they've got to just sit there not thinking, trying to read before they can get to sleep. The feeler's energy level starts out low in the morning, and at midnight they're ready to roll. Now these people marry each other, and here's what happens. My parents come over and they get the kids. Now that's odd to happen, and now I got a night alone with Betty. And I go off to work, and I'm thinking all day, I have this night alone with Betty. I can't wait till tonight. Tonight's going to be romantic. I can't wait till I'm with Betty. Oh, this is going to be great. We have a night alone. It's going to be romantic tonight. That's what I'm thinking all day. But here's what Betty's thinking. Oh, the kids are done. I can get out the toothbrushes I've been saving and clean the corners of the cupboards. I'm finally going to be able to go ahead and sort the buttons and get the brown ones away from the white ones. Oh, I can't wait to get downstairs and dust the stuff that Aunt Grace gave us. Oh, I'm going to get so far ahead today in the garden and cleaning out the corners, and then I'm going to get to sleep early. I can't wait till tonight. So I come rolling into the bedroom at 10 o'clock, full of faith and hope, looking for the fulfillment of love, and all I hear when I walk in there is, I take that as total rejection. Is it rejection? No, it's just different people and different energy levels, and I misread the thing. Now, a doer's a lot of fun because what they do is they get out of bed and they go flat out and then just drop in, and instantly they're snoring. And they're married to thinkers too. And so what the thinker's done is they've laid there for 30 minutes saying, must not think, must go to sleep, must not think, must go to sleep. They're reading the dictionary. Betty reads the dictionary at night. I told her, I said, I'd try that, but I said, I don't think I could handle the adrenaline rush when I hit the F's or the E's or whatever it is that you hit. Well, the doer then comes flying in just as the thinker's drifting off and hammers into bed, wakes them up, and the doer immediately starts snoring. And the thinker then has the biggest temptation in their life, which is not to take the pillow and suffocate them. All right, let's end there.